Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the offensive line and what I'm expecting from them. But before we get started, I just wanted to mention that you can follow me on social media at Matt O'Leary NY on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you haven't already, please make sure to call in, leave me your questions for the podcast. Every Monday, new episodes drop. I'll try to get to your question on the show. So last year, the Jets' offensive line was an utter disaster. Poor Joe Douglas had a lot of work to do. And if you look at what the Jets' starting offensive line from week one of last year was versus what it is right now, there are zero starters carried over from that line. Zero. So it was a complete overhaul of the offensive line. They ranked 31st out of 32 teams in offensive line DVOA. They were atrocious, especially at run blocking. Le'Veon Bell had no chance, and that offensive line desperately needed an overhaul, which is what you saw through the draft and through free agency. So I'm going to start for who I think is going to be the starter, working from the left side all the way over to the right side, and coming in as the starting offensive left tackle, Mekhi Becton, the first-round draft choice, of course, is going to be the starter. He was drafted out of Louisville and is expected to be plugged in on the left side, and his ceiling is very high. His floor is on the lower side compared to the other first-round draft prospects on the O-line, but something that I like about him is his size. Yes, that could be one of the flaws because he's just so big, but I think he is going to be an absolute freak as a run blocker in year one. Pass protection, I think there's going to be some ups and downs. Expect there to be ups and downs for a rookie offensive lineman. I think eventually he is going to be very good, but I think he's going to be spotty in his first year. There's going to be some really good starts. There's going to be some bad starts, but overall, expectations are pretty high for Mekhi Becton, and it's easy to see why. He's an absolute freak of nature when it comes to his body and his size. And I think it translates at the NFL level, but that's what we're going to be able to see. Can he develop in year one and beyond that? That's the big question with Mekhi Becton. This is someone who should be a long-term starting option on the offensive line if everything pans out, which I trust Joe Douglas in his scouting department when it comes to the offensive line. He played O-line, and he came from two organizations that built up a couple of pretty good offensive lines. So Mekhi Becton should be your starting left tackle and is a long-term option. At left guard, I expect Alex Lewis to be the starter. The New York Jets traded a late-round draft pick in order to acquire Alex Lewis, and they signed him to a 3-year deal this offseason. They could theoretically get out of it after 1 year with very little cap hit after the first year. I definitely expect him to be on the roster for this year as a starter. Beyond that, I'm not really too sure. It depends on how the years go, because if he struggles, they can get out of it and look to improve, or they could look to contain him at a reasonably low cost. He was probably the Jets' most consistent offensive lineman last year. I thought he was okay. He wasn't great. He obviously played mostly left guard for them last year. He had a 56.1 Pro Football Focus grade. He was much better in pass protection than run, but he is someone who is at least an okay caliber starting offensive lineman. I think he is going to be penciled in as the starter on opening day, and unless Cameron Clark, who we'll talk about later, blows everyone out of the water, then I don't think they're going to look to move on from Alex Lewis until after the year, if at all. But I definitely think he is going to be a starter, and a decent starter. He's not phenomenal. He's not bad. He's an okay starting guard. Then there was Connor McGovern, who the Jets brought in from Denver as a center, and this to me was Joe Douglas's best signing, or the most under-the-radar one that people aren't talking about enough. He signed a 3-year deal worth $7.3 million against the cap for this year. He had a 72 overall Pro Football Focus grade as a center. That was ranked the 10th best out of any center in the league. To me, he's a no doubt top 10 center, something the Jets have struggled with ever since Nick Mangold retired. You had Wesley Johnson, who was terrible. You had, well, oh my God, what is his name? Why am I blanking on his name? Spencer Long, who you brought in for 1 year, who got Sam Darnold hurt. Jonathan Harrison, Ryan Khalil. You had a laundry list of guys who didn't work out, but McGovern is lock solid in the middle of that offensive line. And my favorite thing from last year, he had 0 penalties and 1 sack allowed. That's tremendous. That is an immediate upgrade. He is, at minimum, a very good starter and borderline elite level starting center in this league. He is a very good player, and without a doubt, in my eyes, the best offensive lineman right now. Obviously, you're hoping that Mekhi Becton becomes that as the years progress, but as of right now, he is the rock in the center of that offensive line and should be a very good starter. At right guard, Brian Winters was just cut, so obviously he is not going to be the starter. It looked like it was going to be a competition between him and Greg Van Roten Roten, but Greg Van Roten will get the job after signing a 3-year deal worth $10.5 million. Cap hits $3.3 million for this year. Like Lewis's contract, it's essentially a 1-year deal. You could get out of it for very little penalty after this year if they decide to. It all depends on how he plays this year, obviously, and the progression of some of the other offensive linemen that they are developing. But he had a 65.6 Pro Football Focus grade last year. He had just 2 penalties, 1 sack allowed. He's a solid guard. He's not great. He's not bad. He's an okay level, like Alex Lewis, okay level guard. But again, that's an improvement over Brian Winters, who last year really struggled. Yes, he's played through injuries the last few years, but he's not the same guy that he was in like 2015. He's really struggled the last 3 years or so, and it was time to move on, and I definitely think they got to upgrade at the right guard position in Greg Van Roten. Now at right tackle, George Fant to me is going to be the starter here. They signed him to a 3-year deal, $27.3 million contract. Again, common theme, you can get out of this for very little cap cost after 1 year. I don't know if I trust him as a long-term starter. He started just 7 games with Seattle last year. He played tight end a little bit in different packages. He's not someone who has a ton of starting experience at his age, but it's a little bit of a risk. And to me, he's the one that worries me the most on this offensive line. I'm pretty confident in Becton. Yes, there's going to be ups and downs there. McGovern's a lock at center, and I think you have 2 okay guards, but Fant on the right side is, to me, the weakest link of this offensive line. We'll see. He had a 62.2 Pro Football Focus grade last year, and he had some pretty good tape against San Francisco, who has a dominant defensive line, but he played relatively well for Seattle in that game. Again, he's probably the biggest question mark, but he's going to have a chance to be the starter for this year. I expect him to start every game unless something disastrous happens there. I trust him over Chuma Edoga, who we're going to talk about in a second, but ultimately, to me, he will be the starting right tackle, which fills out the starting offensive lineman. I definitely expect this offensive line to be much improved. Now, I don't know if they're going to be a top 10 line in the league. I wouldn't even say top 15, but I think they finish around 20th in offensive line DVOA, which would be a massive improvement. Sam Darnold had absolutely zero favors from that offensive line last year. They finished again 31st in offensive line DVOA. To me, from the eye test, they were the worst line in football. It was brutal. They couldn't run protect. They couldn't pass protect. It was bad. And hopefully this helps Le'Veon Bell. This helps Sam Darnold's development. But I think they should be, I'm going to say, the 20th overall unit in the league, which is not great. There's still some more room for improvement there, which I think Joe Douglas knows, and he's going to look to do in the draft and in free agency after this year. And depending on who they want to keep around, they have some movable pieces at both guard positions, at right tackle. But ultimately, this is an improved offensive line. Some key backups. Jonathan Harrison has had a lot of starting experience at both center and guard. He can play both positions, which is intriguing to me. I don't think he's a good starting center, but I think he is one of the better backup centers in the league. So if for whatever reason Connor McGovern goes down or something happens and you need a backup, I think he could be plugged in. Cameron Clark is someone who I don't think is going to be a starter this year. The Jets drafted him in the late rounds from a small school. He played tackle in college, but I think he's someone who transitioned to guard in the next, at the next level in this league. I don't expect him to start this year. I do think he will be competing for a job in 2021, and I would not be surprised if he was a starting offensive lineman for this team in 2021. You plug him next to Becton, and I think that is a dominant force on the left side. They both play extremely physical. They are both big, mean, nasty guys, so I think that's the long-term plan there. Next up, Chuma Edoga. I think he's a long-term backup. I don't really see him as a starter. I thought he struggled last year, especially against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yannick Ngakoue put him in an absolute box the entire game. It was brutal, especially on the left side. He was a little bit better on the right side, but I don't trust him enough to be a starter. That's why I think Fant gets the job, and if one of Fant or Becton goes down with an injury, then I would expect that Edoga would be the first one off the bench to get plugged into that role. And then there's Josh Andrews, who was brought in as a free agent, just a depth player. I think is someone who, can play if necessary. You're not obviously hoping for Andrews to play, but if you need him to, I think he could hold his own for, a spot start here and there. And ultimately, like I said, I think this is an improved unit. This is almost the middle of the pack offensive line. I don't think they're quite there yet. I think they need another year of free agency in the draft before I'm really feeling comfortable about this line. But this was the most important piece going into this season. And to be fair to Joe Douglas's credit, He brought in 5 new starters versus last year's opening day to this year. Alex Lewis is the only starter by the end of the year that they brought back. So I am looking forward to see what this offensive line can do in this offense. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Matt O'Leary, and I'll talk to you next time.